Thank you guys for coming here today. It is day 4 of Open Ed Week. I hope you guys have had some time to go check out some of the other workshops as well. My name is Stephanie Coffman. I'm from Clovis Community College, and I'm our OERI liaison there, but I'm also a biology instructor. So I'm just going to drop this link in the chat again because I just heard somebody jump in. But if you can click on the link, or you can answer these questions. So here's what we have so far. It looks like most of you guys are part-time faculty. In terms of what school, a lot of you are from Fresno City. That tends to happen. And then in terms of how long you've been teaching, a few of us have been teaching more than 10 years. That's awesome. And then looks like in the middle between 3 and 10 years. That's where I also would fit. Okay. The second question was about OER. So how aware of OER we are. So this first one, I am aware of what OERs are. So we got a 3.4. I know where to find them in the middle. I'm comfortable using Creative Commons licenses. We're at a 2.4 out of 5, and comfortable adapting and remixing. We're at a 2.8 out of 5. So this talk today is going to focus a lot on these bottom 2 panels. So I will review sort of briefly what Creative Commons licenses are, but most of what we're going to be talking about is, once you know what they are, what can you actually do with them? So I'm going to jump back to my slides here, and hello to people who just joined. I heard a doorbell. All right, so what we're going to be talking about in this next hour, a quick introduction. I'll do a crash course on open licensing because it is important to understand. Stop me and ask questions. And then we're going to talk about how you can take different OERs and adapt them for your own purposes, how you can remix them, put different ones together, how you can curate OERs, and we'll also have some time for discussion and questions at the end. So this is one of those topics where the more you delve into it, the more questions you find. It's just kind of like, so what is OER? There's a lot of definitions out there, but most people agree that open educational resources are materials that allow for these 5 Rs. They're not defined by being free or digital, so they can be online, but they could also be print. A lot of them are free, but sometimes they're not free. Sometimes there's some cost associated with printing them. But what these 5 Rs are is that they let other people reuse the content, revise it, and remix the content. So that's a lot of what we are going to talk about today. Also lets them retain it so they can have it and make copies of it and redistribute it, right? So we're going to focus a lot on these licenses that let us revise and remix materials to create something new and create something tailored to our students. What are the benefits of an OER textbook? There are a lot. The driving factor behind the whole OERs ETC movement is money, right? Removing this barrier to education, that is the cost of textbooks, which has gotten much higher over the years. But there are a lot of other benefits as well. The first one being access. If you use an OER textbook, 100% of your students will have access to course materials on the first day of the semester, or even before it if you send it out earlier. Student success, there's data that suggests students are less likely to drop an OER course, and we've done our own internal surveys that also confirm that across the district. Students are less likely to drop a course if it has a 0 textbook cost. What we'll be talking about today are these last 3. Adaptability. You can edit your textbook to better reflect your students. You can also put in a lot of your own creativity. You can create lessons using OERs that engage your students. And your textbooks, when they're OER, you can update them to make sure they're always up to date. So as a biology instructor, I really like this one because I can just edit my book and add in new things that are happening right now. And a lot of times, if you're going through a traditional publisher, that takes more time. So I'm going to give you guys an analogy real quick and just bear with me as I go through it. It will make sense when I get to the end. With an OER textbook, you get so much more than just a free textbook, right? So the analogy I'm going to use here is the cell phone. We were all very excited when cell phones came out. You might have had like a Nokia phone or a flip phone or something like this. In my analogy, this is a copyrighted traditional textbook. Comes with everything you need, right? Comes with ancillaries, comes with all the things you need to do what a phone or textbook needs to do. When the iPhone came out decades after that, a lot of people bought an iPhone and just used it for a while, just the same exact way they had used the previous cell phones, right? When it first came out, most people just used these very smart phones to call people and text people and maybe check their email, right? But we now know you can use a smartphone for a lot more than just calling people and texting people. So in my analogy, this smartphone is our OER textbooks. You can use an OER textbook the same way you would use a copyrighted textbook. Just adopt it, has slides, has homeworks, all there. But because of the open licenses, you can actually do a lot more with an OER textbook than you can a traditional textbook. So with our phone analogy, you could walk around your neighborhood and try to collect some Pokemon. There's infinite things that you can do with a smartphone. And so because of the open licensing of an OER textbook, you can do a lot more. It has a lot more power behind it to you, the educator, than a traditional textbook would do. And you don't have to use all of those features, but to really get the most out of an OER, those features are available to you. And those are the features we're going to be talking about today, being able to adapt, being able to remix, being able to curate and create collections tests. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts so far? It's just my little introduction. We're going to jump into a crash course, though, on Creative Commons licenses. So I do want to give a pause in case there are questions. Can I also get you guys, because I see some more people have joined, if you wouldn't mind typing into the chat just your name and what college is your main college, that will help me grab attendance. You're also welcome to type any questions in the chat or tell me to slow down. Okay, so crash course in Creative Commons licenses. Yesterday, Amanda from Readly did a talk just on what they are. I'm going to talk today about how you can smash them together. So let's talk really quickly about what they are. I am not a lawyer, I'm a biology instructor, but I do know quite a bit about Creative Commons licenses. So I want you guys to consider a very common scenario. So an English professor is creating a brand new and original essay prompt for their course. At what point would they own the copyright to this work? A, as soon as they write or type it out. B, as soon as they send it out to their students the first time. C, when they file for copyright. Or D, never. An essay prompt isn't something you can copyright. So what do you guys think? You can type a letter in the chat for the one that you think is correct. You're welcome to unmute yourself and provide us with your thoughts as well. You're not expected to know the answer, of course. So we've got D, A, we got a couple A's, C, all right. The reason I'm asking you this question is because the answer is actually A. As soon as they create it, it is theirs, and there is a copyright protecting it immediately. So in the US, you do not have to file for a copyright for it to be there. When you create something, it is automatically copyrighted. As soon as you give it form, when it's just in your brain, that's not copyrighted. But as soon as you create the thing and it has a form and it exists, then it is now yours and it's protected under copyright. Creative Commons licenses don't erase this. This thing that you created, it still belongs to you. But a lot of people, myself included, when we create something for our class, we don't really intend to just keep it for ourselves. We do create it with the intention of sharing it with our colleagues. So what these open licenses do is they make plain and clear what the author intended for the use of those materials, right? Gloria asked, what about art and song? That's a great question. For music, you have to record it, right? And then it is automatically copyrighted. So what these open licenses do here on the far side for copyright, this is what, as soon as you create something, it's protected by copyright. And that means that any reuse requires permission from you, the person who wrote it, the copyright owner. Now, if you're making something for your class that you want to make a little easier to share, then we have these other options, these Creative Commons options. And there's other types of open licenses, but Creative Commons are the most popular and the easiest to use and access. So in the middle, our Creative Commons license, you can see we've gone from all rights reserved to some rights reserved. So in the Creative Commons licenses, you're saying, yes, it's mine, but you can add on there sort of conditions that say, but you're welcome to use it, right? Or you're welcome to edit it, or you're welcome to use it, but only if it's for certain purposes, right? So it helps you, the author of the material, say how you want others to use your materials. And I'm going to talk about the different permissions that you can give up with the Creative Commons license and the ones that you can choose to keep. And then on the far side is no rights reserved, and you guys may be familiar with this one a little more, is the public domain. So things are in the public domain sometimes because they're very old, or also people do choose to put things in the public domain. Also in the US, a lot of things that are created by our government can't be copyrighted and they go into the public domain. So for example, data that the CDC collects automatically into the public domain because it belongs to all of us. That's how it works in the US. So in the public domain, no rights are reserved, meaning you can just use this thing without any permissions, right? That is also an open license as well, the public domain. So for Creative Commons licenses, there are 6 of them to choose from, and there are 4 sort of elements that can make up these licenses, and then we can combine the elements to make the 6. The first element is by or by, and this is an attribution element. And this says, yes, you can use my work, but you must attribute it back to me, the original creator of this work. And that work is denoted by this little person symbol here. The second one is a share alike element, or the SA element. This element says, yes, you may use my work and you can adapt my work and do all kinds of stuff with it, but whatever you make with it, you have to use the same license for it. I want you to keep using the same Creative Commons license for those later adaptations. This one has this sort of circle arrow symbol. The next one is non-commercial. This one says, yes, you can use my work and you can adapt my work and you can give it to your students, but only if you're using this for non-commercial work. Honestly, a lot of educators do like to add this bit to their license. And this one is a money sign with a no through it. So this would just mean that only non-commercial purposes for your work. And then the last one is an ND or no derivatives element. This one says, you can use my work for free, you can distribute it for free, but you can't adapt it in any way or change it in any way. So this one is denoted with this equal sign symbol. So in OER, no derivatives are not recognized as being actually an OER because it doesn't allow for other educators to adapt it and remix it and make it more specific for their courses. That doesn't mean you can't use no derivative items if you find them and they're applicable to your course, but you're not able to really adapt and remix those elements. So I'll pause here if you guys have any questions so far. All right, are we all up to speed on these elements? Okay. So we can put these together to make these 6 Creative Commons licenses. And so the little CC is Creative Commons, and then you can see the elements next to them. So this one is just CC by SA, and so on, right? So I want to pause here and just kind of take a minute to take in all 6 of these and what they would imply when you add these elements to them. And so my first question is, which of these licenses do you guys think would be the most open or the least restrictive to the person who's trying to use this downstream in their classroom? You can write in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Gloria asks, how do we know images are in the public domain? That is a wonderful question. Sometimes you don't, because people don't have to say, they don't have to attribute it if it is in the public domain. So when you see an image, even in a textbook, for example, in biology, there's this image of Gregor Mendel. It's in all the textbooks. It is in the public domain, right? But they don't have to say that in the textbook, so you wouldn't necessarily know that. So one of the things the Creative Commons is trying to do is curate and collect public domain images and add a public domain element to it. So they actually do have a public domain symbol in addition to these 6, that if you happen to know an image is in the public domain, you can add that tag to it to help people in the future identify public domain images, because that is a problem. You don't know if that image is in the public domain or if that author has some special permission to use it. So what do you guys think would be the most open license of these? So Melinda says CC BY would be the most open.
So, oh yeah, that was the most open, sorry. And then I
Yeah.
read it, I was like, oops, least open.
Yeah, there's 2 questions, most open and least open, unless I have a typo.
Right.
Yeah. So the most open would be the CC BY. This one means basically you can do anything you want, anything you can imagine to do, you can do it. You just have to say, attribute it back to me. So that is a really important practice in OER, because all Creative Commons licenses require attribution. So we need to always be attributing to the people that we got our OER from. So most restrictive. So the least open, what do you guys think would be the least open, most restrictive? So Liana says ND seems most restrictive, but we do have 2 licenses that have a non-derivative. You can have the CC BY non-derivative, CC BY NC non-derivative.
So I guess, I was like, well, with the NC non-derivative, I'm like, does it matter when you're thinking about least most restrictive, whether or not you can use it for commercial purposes?
Yeah, I guess as educators, it doesn't, right? Because we could use either of those and we would have the same problems. But it will matter when you're trying to remix them. But that's a really good point. They both don't let you alter it in any way. So they do restrict, any of the ones with non-derivative greatly restrict what you're able to do with it. All right. So I think a lot of you guys are working on projects at all of your different colleges that you're either making your own OERs or you're finding your own OERs. So it is important to figure out which of these licenses you feel most comfortable with. Just keeping in mind that the more elements that the more difficult the things we're going to talk about today become for downstream users. So when it comes to people later trying to take many OERs from different people and put them together, some of our Creative Commons licenses will conflict with each other. So do we have any questions before we move on? That's a very, very crash course in Creative Commons licensing. All right, so let's talk about remixing and adapting. So going back to our cell phone analogy from the very beginning, it's really great to get an OER textbook. You can give it to your students for free. That's the first step. And then if you want to start sort of tailoring those, you can really build something special for your students. So when you adapt or remix different open educational resources, there's a lot of benefits that come with it. You can better align your OER materials to your SLOs. You can include a lot of relevant examples. So examples that are from Fresno, right? From our valley, from our state, versus a traditional textbook that's just written for anybody in the whole country to read. So you can really make it relevant. You can improve the representation of the work in images and stories. You can create more culturally responsive materials that your students can really relate to. You can add local examples. You can also modify it in ways that will make it more accessible for our students. And you can also really tailor a textbook so that it only contains the things you're covering. This might be different in different disciplines, but a lot of times in biology, a textbook can have like 30 chapters and maybe you only cover 15, right? Or only pieces of them. Then you can actually say like, here's my exact textbook, and your students don't get lost looking for the important information in the textbook. All right, so what do we mean when we say this? I keep saying adapting and remixing. So adapting or revising, this is really common, and this is a really powerful thing about OERs. If you get a worksheet or a lab protocol that has an OER license, this is my cat Hiccup. He loves Zoom. Then you can actually take that work if it has the right license, right? If it doesn't have the ND, and you can adapt it for your students and for your class. So this is a very powerful thing that you can do with it. You can also remix multiple OERs. So you can take OERs from all sorts of different places, from different authors, and you can put them together into a new work, right? So maybe there are 4 textbooks for your class that are OER, but you don't really like all of them the best, or you like some things about the first one, other things about the second one. You could actually take what you like about the first book and what you like about the second book and what you like about the third book and put them together into a new book. And so that's what we would call remixing, putting together many different OERs. And in honesty, when you start to do this, you might end up doing both of these things. When you start remixing things, you also end up adapting them, right? Because you want it to be one cohesive work in the end. You guys have any questions or thoughts so far? I'm sorry, my email keeps going off. Let me just take a moment to close it. That is better. So when we start to do these things, though, we do have to start to think about, trying to go back into full screen, sorry. All right, we do have to start to think about the licenses of the works that we are going to remix or going to adapt. So a common analogy of remixing OERs is taking different fruits and making a smoothie. So in this example here, we have some bananas, strawberries, pineapples, oranges. We're going to put them all together. We're going to blend them together and we're going to make a smoothie. At the end, no one can tell where the banana is, where the strawberry is, where the pineapple is, right? It's one cohesive work. There's no obvious point where you have like pasted these things together. It's just a nice solid one piece of work in the end. And it doesn't look much like maybe the things you started with. You can do this with OERs, but you do have to think about the licenses that went in this. So in our example, the author at the end chose this license for the smoothie. They chose the CC by NC-SA. The things that they put into the smoothie were these bananas, the strawberries, the pineapples, and the oranges. So if you guys study these different elements or different fruits, why do you guys think they chose that particular license for the smoothie?
I'm sorry, my brain did not process your specific question. Like I started thinking about different, I don't know. Can you repeat your question?
No worries. So in the end, our work here, which is the smoothie, has a CC by NC SA license. When we put in all these 4 different fruits, these are all OERs, so each fruit has its own license. So my question is, why would the author choose this particular license for the smoothie? Why didn't the author choose CC by for the smoothie? Why would that not work? So Rosa is saying because it's the most restrictive. Scott Phillips is saying to conform to the most restrictive license, right? Does that sound about right? There's one particular thing on it that means we have to choose this license.
Is it, I'm sorry, the image is small for me, but is it the share alike?
Yes, it is the
Okay.
share alike, right? Because the oranges have the CC by NCSA license on it, that SA says anything that uses these oranges in the future must carry this same license. So you actually don't have a choice for this smoothie. It has to have a CC by NCSA license on it. Now, if you hadn't put the oranges in the smoothie, then you could have picked a couple different things. You would have had more options. But because the oranges have the SA, you have to have the SA license on them. So I'll show you guys this chart, kind of summarize. Oh, there's a chart that summarizes all of the sort of considerations. But when we are adapting and remixing, we need to think of a couple things. First, if it has a non-derivative, it's out. You cannot adapt and remix something that has a non-derivative element on it. Like our smoothie, licenses that have an SA require that whatever it is you create with it has the same license on it, right? So you're restricted to only using that one. Now, when it comes to non-commercial licenses, it is highly recommended that if you're using a work with a non-commercial license on it, that you also choose a non-commercial license as well, just to honor the wishes of the person who created that first thing. So in this table, it shows here on the side is the original work and on the top is the licenses you could choose from. Kind of shows which licenses wouldn't be compatible with each other. So if you look on the left where it says CC by NCSA, which is the license of our smoothie or of the oranges, you can see that anything that's made from it, there's only one green box in that whole row. It has to have the same CC by NCSA licenses. You'll notice some of these boxes are yellow. The yellow boxes are a recommendation, and it's a recommendation I suggest we all follow as well. This is that non-commercial element. Technically, if you're looking on the left side, if the original work is, say, CC by NC, then you can actually put a different license on that. Like you could put a CC by license, or you could put a CC by ND license, but it's not recommended. That's why these ones are colored yellow. It's not recommended because obviously the person who made that original work didn't want their work used commercially. So it's best practices in that case to put a non-commercial license on your new work if you're using something that started with the non-commercial license. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts so far about how these licenses fit together? You can see some licenses, if they start very open, you can choose a lot, right? So if you start with the CC BY license, your work can be any one of these green boxes in the second row, right? Any questions before we move on? All right, I think some people joined. So if you didn't earlier, please just type in your name and your college in the chat so we can get attendance. All right, so this is a similar table, but it's a little different. The previous table was adapting. So you're starting with one thing. This one is remixing, but it's going to be the same similar principles like in our smoothie, right? If you have a work some works are not going to be compatible with each other. So here we're looking at like two of the works you want to put together, and can you put them together? So the ones that have non-derivative clauses, they have X's all the way across. And the more restrictive the license is, the less other licenses it is going to be compatible with. So if you start with our first column, that's the public domain, it's compatible with basically everything except our non-derivatives, right? Same thing with our CC BY license is going to be compatible with everything except the non-derivatives. But then as we start adding more elements, then it's going to be compatible with less and less things. So if you have a share-like license, it's only going to be compatible with things less restrictive than that. So as we move across, there'll be less and less green boxes, less and less compatibility. All right, do you guys have any questions so far? So the last thing I want to talk about is curating or creating collections. So sometimes this becomes a really great option. It also just depends on what kind of courses you teach, but this can become a great option if there are non-derivative things that you really need or want to use. And also it just fits with some types of classes. Like if you have a lot of distinct readings in your classes, then creating a collection instead of a remix might be a good idea. So a collection is just a group of works that are all separate. So you're not remixing them to like make them all together and cohesive. You're not smashing them together. Instead, each work is going to have its own author and its own license. You're not really editing them, and each one will be unique. And you're just putting them together in some format. Either you could be putting them all together into a Canvas course in a module. You could be putting them together into an actual textbook if you want to. Or into a giant PDF or something like that. But each work inside of it will have its own. And so the benefit of that is if there is something that has a no derivative, you can include it in this collection because you're not going to alter the works. You're just collecting them together. Now you can add things around the works. So maybe you might add a foreword, or maybe you might add a page introducing each of the readings that is your work that you can put your own license on. So if we think about our fruit example, this would be more like a fruit basket. So not a smoothie, we're not smushing everything together, but it would be more like a fruit basket where each fruit inside of the basket stays itself. And you're not changing it at all. It's just going to be what it always was. So in this way, they are all more compatible with each other. So here, each apple has its own license, and that is fine. And you can see one of them is a non-derivative license. So you're not altering any of these, you're just putting them together. What you could still license is, in this case, the basket. And what the basket represents is the sort of thing you created around the works, right? Like you might have made a table of content and cover pictures. You might have added information in before each one, introducing it to your students. You might have added questions about them or reflection or something like that. All of those elements that you added would have its own license because it's created by you. And in this case, you could really choose any license you wanted for your part of the work, because each of the things inside of them are still the licensed whatever they were licensed before. Do you guys have any questions about the difference between these two ideas or anything really? All right, so let's go through a couple scenarios. You guys can unmute yourself or you can type it in the chat. All right, scenario one, Jackie wants to provide a handout with different speech examples that her students can watch for their public speaking course. She decides to incorporate speeches that were from 4 different OER books into her worksheet. Is she adapting, remixing, or curating? What do you guys think? You're welcome to type it in the chat or unmute yourself, whatever you're comfortable with.
She's adapting.
She's not editing the speeches at all, right?
Okay.
So I think people wouldn't like that if you went back and edited their speeches.
Oh.
Yeah, so since she's not editing it, it wouldn't be adapting. What we call the fruit basket, yeah. So we could call this a collection. Because each of those speeches is not being changed, right? And each of those speeches is going to just belong to the person who wrote them and have whatever license they had on them. All right, let's look at a second scenario. So a colleague wants to make an adaptation of a worksheet they found that is licensed CC by NC. They want to license the new adaptation CC by. What advice would you give your colleague? And over here I have just to remind everybody, these are the 6 licenses, and these are the 4 elements of the licenses. So what do you guys think? What would you tell your colleague in this situation? What advice might you give them?
I think I would advise incorporating also the non-commercial, since the original author wanted non-commercial purposes. I think.
I like that. Anybody else? Are they technically allowed? Oh, sorry, did someone was saying something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, maybe it doesn't conform to the wishes of the original author, so maybe it's not recommended.
Yeah. Is it technically legal? So for this one, I think you guys are right on there, right? It is allowable. You could take this worksheet and your colleague could do this, but it is not recommended, right? It is better to honor the wishes of the person who made the worksheet, which clearly wanted to keep this work in the non-commercial realm. It also gets very messy because when you do this, your new CC BY license, so if your colleague did put that license on there, it only applies to the new work that they made. And how is the downstream user going to know? Like, oh, that's the sentence that the second person wrote, and that sentence someone else wrote. They're not, because it's going to be all smashed together. So it greatly simplifies, it honors the wishes of the people before, but it also greatly simplifies downstream users who are using this. They don't have to try to figure out which part of this is non-commercial and which part is not. You guys have any other thoughts about this example? All right, so this was our adapters license chart, right? That's why these boxes are yellow, because it is recommended, even though it's not an illegal requirement. All right, scenario 3, Raphael wants to remix and adapt 2 works. One is licensed CC by ND and the other is licensed CC by SA. What advice would you give Raphael?
Well, the one that's licensed with no derivatives, wouldn't that be ineligible to kind of remix?
I think so. Does everybody else agree? So it is, you can't remix it. So what might we be able to do instead?
Curate it like the fruit basket.
Right. So maybe it might not work, but you could suggest that maybe instead you just keep these things separate, right? And I've had that happen too before when making labs for my class, right? I've come across a lab that has a no derivative on it. So it just is by itself, right? Lab 3 is a no derivative. I don't touch that one. I don't edit that one. It clearly says this one belongs to so-and-so and it has this license on it. All right, so these are our compatible license. So I will send out these slides. So the very last thing I just wanted to talk about, since we're talking about licensing, is attributions. So when you are remixing these things, it is important to still attribute where you got that work from. The way people do this does look a little different depending on what kind of thing they're making, but there's a link to an attribution builder here and it will be in the slides. So an attribution usually looks something like this. It has the title of it, it has who wrote it, and it has their license and a link to it. So this is just a picture. It's like cupcakes from Creative Commons party or 10th birthday celebration. This is what a good attribution would look like. This is attributing just to the original work. So let's say now we take this picture and we adapt it. We change it, right? And we make it whatever filter this is, right? We change it a bit. Now it's ours and theirs, right? We've both put things into this. So your attribution, 90s is supposed to be the 90s. Your attribution might look something like this. This work, and they've named this new work 95, is a derivative of, and then you can cite that original one, right? Or attribute to it here. It's not citing. Creative Commons 10th birthday celebration by the author. And then here's their license. And then you would include your license and your name. In this case, they've chosen the same CC BY license. And it would just be, you're the creator of this work, right? But you're attributing back to the previous work that you built on. Where in your work you do this depends. Sometimes people put all of it at the end. And you could have many works here, right? You could say this work is a derivative of and have like 3 or 4 things in there. And then the end work, whatever it is you're calling it, is yours. And you have your license that is compatible with all the licenses inside of it. Do you guys have any questions about attributing? All right, so here's some resources for when you guys get the slides, some different textbooks, information on it. I'm from Clovis, so I put our CCC OER LibGuide, which has a lot of great stuff. So I'm going to stop the recording, and if you guys have questions, we still have about 15 minutes left.